The guard thought it was a medical emergency. That's how it always starts. A body slumped in a cell. No struggle. No noise. Just silence where a man should have been breathing. The radio crackled. Footsteps echoed down concrete. Keys shook in a hand that had opened this door 100 times before. By the time the cell was unlocked, it was already too late. The inmate inside wasn't supposed to be vulnerable. He wasn't weak. He wasn't anonymous. He was notorious, convicted, sentenced, removed from society because the world outside couldn't contain him. And yet, inside the place designed to hold him forever, he was dead. Prisons are sold as endings. A final chapter. A full stop. Once the verdict is read and the doors close, danger is supposed to be neutralized, contained behind steel, routine, and surveillance. But history tells a darker story. Again and again, the most dangerous criminals don't simply live out their sentences. They are hunted. They are silenced. They are killed. Not on the streets. Not during arrest. But inside the very institutions built to keep everyone safe. Across the United States and Europe, the deaths of notorious inmates have sent shockwaves through justice systems. These weren't random acts of violence. They were warnings about blind spots, about intelligence failures, about what happens when power doesn't disappear after conviction. It just relocates. One of the most infamous examples unfolded in White Plains, New York. In August 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. He was one of the most high-profile detainees in the world, awaiting trial on federal charges that threatened to expose powerful networks far beyond prison walls. He was supposed to be under constant supervision. He wasn't. What followed wasn't just public outrage, it was disbelief. Cameras malfunctioned. Guards fell asleep. Procedures failed simultaneously in ways that defied coincidence. The official conclusion closed one door, but opened dozens more questions. If a man this watched could die unseen, what did that say about everyone else? But Epstein wasn't alone. Decades earlier, another notorious name died behind bars under circumstances that still echo through European criminal history. In a high-security Italian prison, Salvatore Riina, the brutal head of the Corleonesi crime family, spent his final years in near-total isolation. Riina had ordered countless murders, destabilized Italy, and declared war on the state itself. When he died in custody in 2017, officially from illness, many believed prison had finally done its job. Others weren't so sure. Because Riina's imprisonment had triggered internal power shifts, betrayals, and silences. Even dying naturally, his presence, and eventual absence, reshaped criminal hierarchies outside prison walls. In some cases, death isn't the end of influence. It's the trigger. In the United States, the pattern repeats with chilling regularity. Gang leaders stabbed in cells they were never supposed to share. Informants found dead after their cooperation becomes known. High-risk inmates killed during moments of unexpected contact, transport, recreation, medical visits. Each case arrives with its own explanation. Taken together, they form a pattern. At Rikers Island, violence inside detention facilities has claimed the lives of inmates with extensive criminal histories, some of them cooperating witnesses, others deeply embedded in gang structures. Investigations routinely point to staffing shortages, overcrowding, and intelligence breakdowns. But those explanations only go so far. Because the people who die in these places aren't random. They are liabilities. In Europe, similar stories unfold. In Germany, organized crime figures linked to biker gangs and transnational trafficking networks have died in custody under circumstances that raised questions about supervision and inmate separation. In the UK, high-profile inmates connected to gangland violence have been killed inside prisons that were supposedly designed to keep rival groups apart. The message is always the same. Prison doesn't erase the outside world. It imports it. Investigators know this. That's why intelligence units inside prisons exist, to track alliances, intercept communications, and predict violence before it happens. But intelligence relies on one fragile thing: information. And information inside prison is never complete. Walls block sight, not loyalty. What makes these deaths so shocking isn't just that they happen. It's where they happen. Cells are meant to be controlled environments. Movements scheduled. Contacts monitored. Threats assessed. When a notorious criminal dies in prison, it means something went wrong long before the final moment. A threat underestimated. A rivalry misread. A warning ignored. Or worse, understood and accepted. In some cases, the killings are blunt messages. A way to send a signal beyond the prison walls. Cooperation has consequences. Power still reaches you. Silence is safer. In others, the deaths are preventative. Erase a witness. End a feud before it spills outward. Close a chapter that might reopen in court. Prison becomes not a barrier to crime, but a continuation of it, just quieter. Former corrections officials describe a constant tension. On one side, policy, procedure, and public assurances of safety. On the other, an inmate population that includes people who once commanded armies, controlled territories, and ordered deaths with a phone call. Those instincts don't disappear with a uniform. They adapt. And sometimes, the most dangerous moment isn't a riot or a fight. It's a routine day. A door opened because it always opens. A cellmate assigned because classification said it was safe. A transfer approved because paperwork said it was necessary. Violence in prison rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as normal. The public tends to see these deaths as isolated failures. A guard asleep. A camera broken. A policy violated. But insiders see something else. A system stretched thin. Intelligence competing with overcrowding. Decisions made under pressure where every option carries risk. Protect everyone all the time, from people who specialize in exploiting weakness. That's the job. And sometimes the job fails. By the end of this chapter, one truth becomes unavoidable. Some of the most dangerous criminals in history didn't meet their end while committing crimes. They met it after the system declared victory. And as investigators reviewed footage, reports, and autopsies, trying to piece together how yet another notorious inmate died under watch, they uncovered something that reframed everything. A connection. Not between inmates, but between failures. Because when they opened the internal review file and compared cases across decades and countries, one detail kept appearing in the margins. A warning that had been logged and never acted on. The warning wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a threat or a prophecy. It was a line buried in paperwork, an intelligence note flagged low priority because no immediate action followed it. A rivalry noted but deemed contained. An inmate marked as high profile, but stable. A risk acknowledged, then filed away. That's how prison violence survives the system. Not through chaos. Through complacency. Inside correctional intelligence units, there's a phrase officers use quietly: power doesn't stop at sentencing. It changes form. Men who once commanded street crews, mafia families, terror cells, or trafficking networks don't lose relevance when the doors close. They lose mobility, but influence often survives intact. Sometimes it even grows. Because prison concentrates criminals the way cities concentrate markets. In the early 2000s at USP Hazleton, a high-security federal prison nicknamed Misery Mountain, a convicted organized crime figure was found stabbed in his cell. He had been classified as nonviolent inside custody. No recent incidents. No active threats. The attack was precise. No witnesses. No riot. Just a message delivered exactly once. Investigators later discovered the victim had been mediating disputes between rival groups, unofficially, but effectively. When he lost favor on the outside, his protection inside evaporated. The prison hadn't misclassified his risk. It had misunderstood his role. That distinction matters. Because prisons assess behavior, not position. An inmate can be calm, compliant, and cooperative, and still be dangerous to someone else simply by existing. When influence shifts outside, consequences ripple inward faster than intelligence can keep up. By the time staff notice tension, it's often too late. Across Europe, similar patterns emerged. In Spain, a well-known trafficker tied to international smuggling networks was killed in custody after his cooperation with authorities became known. He had been placed in protective housing, but intelligence underestimated how quickly information travels inside prison walls. You don't need phones. You don't need notes. You need time and proximity. Prisons are full of proximity. Shared air. Shared routines. Shared schedules. Even isolation units leak information through staff movement, logistics, and human behavior. A change in escort patterns. A new restriction. A different posture from guards. Inmates notice everything. They always have. In the United Kingdom, multiple high-profile gang-affiliated inmates have been killed inside facilities that were supposedly designed to prevent contact between rival groups. Post-incident reviews often cite unpredictable interactions or isolated procedural lapses. But those phrases mask a harder truth. Separation only works if you know who needs to be separated. And that knowledge is never complete. One former prison intelligence officer described it bluntly. You're always fighting yesterday's war. By the time you understand the hierarchy, it's already shifted. That's how prisons become reactive instead of preventive. Not all deaths come with violence visible on the surface. Some arrive quietly. In Italy, multiple former mafia figures died in custody under natural causes, officially attributed to illness. But investigators later acknowledged that the conditions of extreme isolation, designed to sever criminal command structures, had accelerated physical and psychological decline. The state called it lawful confinement. Families called it something else. Either way, death inside prison rarely feels neutral. In the United States, cooperating witnesses face some of the highest risks. Once cooperation is suspected, not even confirmed, status changes instantly. Protection units fill quickly. Transfers accelerate. But movement itself creates exposure. Transportation. Medical visits. Court appearances. Each moment outside a cell is a potential vulnerability. At Los Angeles County Jail, a cooperating gang member was killed during what was supposed to be a controlled movement. A door opened out of sequence. A timing overlap lasted seconds. That was all it took. The review cited staffing shortages and miscommunication. The people inside called it inevitable. What makes these deaths so unsettling is how ordinary they look afterward. A checklist completed. A report written. A cause of death recorded. A statement released. Then the system moves on. But the impact doesn't. Every death inside prison sends ripples outward. Power vacuums form. Retaliation plans accelerate. Witnesses recant. Silence spreads. Sometimes, killing a man in custody does more than years of violence on the street ever could. It proves reach. This is why some inmates become more dangerous after conviction. They no longer need to hide. They no longer need to balance risk. Their legacy, cooperation status, or symbolic value becomes the threat. And the prison becomes the stage. Administrators understand this, but they're trapped by limitations. Overcrowding. Understaffing. Legal constraints. Human error. You can't isolate everyone. You can't predict every shift in loyalty. You can't remove influence without removing people. And prisons don't exist in a vacuum. By the mid-2010s, internal reviews across multiple countries reached the same conclusion independently. The most dangerous time for a notorious criminal is not arrest. It's incarceration. That's when enemies know exactly where you are. As Chapter 2 closes, the pattern becomes undeniable. These deaths aren't anomalies. They're symptoms. Symptoms of systems designed to contain bodies, not power. And when investigators overlaid timelines from multiple prison killings, different countries, different decades, different criminal organizations, they found something chilling. In nearly every case, there had been advance intelligence. A note. A warning. A recommendation. Not ignored out of malice. Ignored because the system couldn't act fast enough without breaking itself. The final review meetings always sound the same. Muted voices. Legal language. Carefully chosen words that avoid blame without denying reality. Officials sit around long tables, staring at timelines that end with a time of death and a phrase no one ever questions enough. Incident concluded. But inside prisons, incidents don't conclude. They echo. By the time the pattern was undeniable, It was already too large to contain. Across the United States and Europe, correctional agencies were confronting a truth they had quietly avoided for decades. Some inmates were safer on the streets than they were behind bars. Not because prisons were lawless, but because prisons are predictable. And predictability is currency. The most revealing cases weren't the loud ones. Not riots. Not gang wars. They were the deaths that happened in silence, under supervision, inside institutions that had passed every inspection. In the late 1990s, a former cartel lieutenant housed in a European high-security facility was found dead during overnight hours. No forced entry. No visible struggle. The official cause cited medical complications. The internal review noted no evidence of third-party involvement. But intelligence units later acknowledged something else. The inmate had been scheduled to testify against associates still active outside prison walls. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. This is where the line blurs between murder, neglect, and institutional convenience. Because in prison, protection is not absolute. It is negotiated. Correctional officials are bound by competing obligations. Protect the inmate. Protect staff. Maintain order. Follow the law. Preserve public confidence. When those priorities collide, decisions are made quietly. Transfers delayed because there's nowhere safer to go. Protective custody limited because isolation brings lawsuits. Intelligence shared too late because confirmation takes time. In that space between urgency and restraint, people die. One former warden described it as a moral choke point. If we move them too fast, we're accused of abuse. If we don't move them fast enough, we're accused of negligence. And sometimes, either way, someone doesn't make it. That's not corruption. That's collapse under pressure. The public wants certainty. A villain. A single failure to point at. But prison deaths rarely offer that clarity. Take the case of a high-profile gang enforcer killed inside a U.S. maximum security facility in the early 2010s. He had enemies. He had protections. He had been flagged as high risk. And yet, during a routine movement, an interaction occurred that should not have been possible. It lasted seconds. Afterward, every policy had been technically followed. Except the one that mattered. Investigators often discover the same final sequence. A risk assessment updated but not acted on. A staffing request denied due to shortages. A separation order logged but delayed. A supervisor assuming someone else was watching. No conspiracy required. Just a system stretched past its limits. This is why the most dangerous prisons aren't always the ones with the worst reputations. They're the ones that look calm. Because calm can hide pressure building underneath. In Italy, the state's most aggressive anti-mafia incarceration strategy relied on extreme isolation, designed to sever criminal command structures entirely. On paper, it worked. Communication collapsed. Orders stopped flowing. But the human cost was undeniable. Multiple notorious figures died in custody after years of near-total isolation. Officially, illness. Unofficially, a question lingered. When confinement becomes so absolute that survival deteriorates, where does punishment end and outcome begin? No one answers that question out loud. In the United States, the issue manifests differently. Overcrowding turns separation into a luxury. Protective units fill up. High-profile inmates rotate through facilities faster than intelligence can track emerging threats. Every move increases exposure. A man is safest the day he arrives. After that, knowledge spreads. Across Europe, investigators studying prison homicides reached a disturbing consensus. Most killings were not failures of security technology. They were failures of anticipation. Prisons reacted to violence that had already matured, rarely to violence still forming. The most haunting cases are the ones where warnings existed. An intercepted message. A confidential tip. A behavioral shift. Each logged, each assessed, each delayed, because acting too soon can destabilize an entire unit, and acting too late ends a life. By the late 2010s, some correctional agencies quietly changed language in internal documents. Inmate protection became risk management. Prevention became mitigation. Zero tolerance disappeared entirely. Words matter. They reveal expectations. The truth that emerges in the final analysis is uncomfortable. Notorious criminals who die in prison are not always victims of surprise. Sometimes, they are casualties of inevitability. Once an inmate's presence creates more risk than their absence, the system begins to fail them, not deliberately, but structurally. Protection becomes temporary. Isolation becomes unsustainable. And custody becomes something else entirely. A senior investigator once summarized it this way: prison doesn't erase power. It just slows it down. And sometimes, slowing it down makes it more focused. That focus can turn inward. As this documentary closes, the list grows longer. 30 names. 30 deaths. 30 moments when the public was told, this should never happen here. And yet it did. And again. And again. Different countries. Different prisons. Same result. The haunting truth isn't that prisons are violent. It's that they are human systems tasked with containing inhuman levels of risk. Some fail loudly. Others fail quietly. But when notorious criminals are killed behind bars, the message is always the same. The sentence didn't end the story. It changed the setting. And if you think justice ends at the cell door, remember this. Some verdicts are never delivered in court. They're carried out in silence, under watch, under policy, under the illusion that danger stops when freedom does. It doesn't. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit like, subscribe, comment, because some prisons don't end danger, they concentrate it.